As I did with the Literary Dissecting Bond series, I want to let you know how this video game review series will be different from my usual work. First, I'm not big on emulators. I've had some bad experiences with them in the past, right down to almost bricking a laptop, and I'd rather not risk another computer for that. So I'll only be playing games I have access to, and I'll be doing them on original hardware, or as close to original hardware as I can manage. That should still cover most of the Bond games anyone will be curious about. I'll mostly be using my own gameplay footage when I can, but as you can imagine for an N64 game played on the N64, the footage looks pretty bad. Thankfully, Grazlu00 has given me permission to use his videos of this entry, which were captured using emulation and look much better, and I'd like everyone to go support him and his channel if you haven't already. Alright, on to the review.
The name's Bond. James Bond.
A wise woman once said, "Shadows stay in front or behind, never on top." Whatever was going to come after GoldenEye was going to be at a disadvantage, particularly if it was released on the same console. GoldenEye for the N64 was a revolutionary title in a few ways. It proved first-person shooters could work on consoles, even if it wasn't the first to try it. It became a must-own for its multiplayer offering, as well as having a fun and layered single-player campaign. And it gave James Bond his first definitive video game adventure. There were plenty of Bond games released before GoldenEye, but the general public wasn't rushing out to buy them. But now the pressure was on, and the world was watching. Rare was given a chance to do a follow-up to GoldenEye based on the next film, Tomorrow Never Dies. However, Electronic Arts swooped in and outbid them on the project. Rare developers felt this was for the best, as they felt burnt out on the property and had a desire to pursue their own creations, like Banjo-Kazooie and Perfect Dark. Tomorrow Never Dies was developed for the PlayStation 1 by Black Ops Entertainment and received mixed reviews, though most pointed out that there was potential. So it's perhaps understandable that in addition to giving Black Ops another chance for a Bond game on the PlayStation 1, EA also decided that a separate game, also based on the newest film, The World Is Not Enough, would be made for the N64, and they contracted Eurocom to develop it. The game returned to the first-person's perspective of GoldenEye and would feature several other returning elements, such as multiple difficulties featuring unique objectives, a robust multiplayer offering, and a variety of weapons and gadgets. The new game engine was designed to push the N64 to its limits and featured improved graphics, environmental effects, better AI, and voiceover. If the consumer had the new expansion pack, they would benefit from even more enhanced graphics and visual effects. The World Is Not Enough was released towards the end of the year 2000 and was the first of 3 Bond games released for that holiday season. It was also the best received of the bunch, with many considering it a fair follow-up to GoldenEye and a good swan song for the franchise on the N64. The plot is virtually the same as the film. James Bond is sent to protect Elektra King after her father is killed in a terrorist attack at MI6. The chief suspect is Renard, who once kidnapped Elektra and was robbed of his physical senses by a bullet from 009. Yet Bond soon deduces there's more to this plot than a simple revenge scheme, as Elektra is discovered to be in league with Renard and wants to control the world's oil. The game features several expansions of sequences from the film, including a hostage situation in the London subway system and a chase through the streets of Istanbul. The World Is Not Enough is a rather unique game from my history. I was aware of its release soon after I started playing GoldenEye, and it was the game that made me conscious of the existence of other Bond films. However, I didn't play it nearly as much, and that's for 2 reasons. First, the game requires a memory pack to save. Since it was the only game for the N64 I owned that had that distinction, I never went out of my way to purchase one. So every time I booted it up, I would have to start from the beginning, meaning I've replayed the first 5 levels a lot. Second, I found it to be tougher than GoldenEye, which meant I spent more time on the levels, and it led me to want to take more frequent breaks in between. I have since bought a memory pack and have beaten the game a few times, but it remains the Bond game I've owned that I played the least. So there's still a bit of a novelty to me when I play the second half of this game. I've always been vocal about my love for the film, so I'm just stoked to see it adapted into game form and to have the chance to run around its environments. Plus, being a big fan of Agent Under Fire, it's fun to see the DNA of that game again, even if it's on weaker hardware. In all honesty, this game feels like it can be summed up as a testbed for the later games, and that comes with both positive and negative connotations. The game begins at the bank in Bilbao with Bond retrieving the money from Lachaise. Like the films, I expect a lot out of the first few minutes of a Bond game, and thankfully this is a strong opening level. You immediately see that this will be a mix of shooting action while accomplishing objectives, and as with so many games of this era, you are left on your own to figure out how to do these things. It's good old trial and error, though going into the pause menu can help you quite a bit since you can see all the gadgets at your disposal, and that will give you some clues. In addition, Twine has more objectives the higher the difficulty and can feature more enemies, so there's added replay value. The level does end differently than the film. Whereas movie Bond escaped through hopping out the window, the game has you take the elevator or the stairs down and walk out the front door. I'll talk more about the game's deviations from the film in a bit. The next level has you play through the attack on MI6, and it's fantastic. Before this game, we'd never really seen much of the place, so this was such a treat. Running through the halls, gunning down enemies, seeing where Q Branch is located, all that jazz. I would have loved to have seen Bond's office here, but no dice. Depending on your difficulty setting, you'll be given additional tasks, like saving M from being killed or escorting Dr. Molly Warmflash to the vault. If you're a fan of the later EA Bond games, you can definitely feel the influence of this level on those, like in Phoenix Fire from Nightfire, or Bad Diplomacy from Agent Under Fire. Because of the technical limitations of the N64, the game can't recreate the famous Thames boat chase from the film. So instead, you get to race after Cigar Girl through the London docks and into the subway system through 2 separate levels. The underground is my preferred of the two, as I feel the docks are a bit bland visually to run through, and the game starts to do one of my least favorite things from adventure games of the late 90s here. Place bad guys in cheap areas you can't reach who will take pot shots at you before you get your bearings. The subway level is such a cool environment and has a ticking clock from the start, though you'll have plenty of time to find the bomb and defuse it. As Calvin Dyson pointed out in his review of the game, there are some similarities to Skyfall here, such as Bond narrowly missing a train by going through a door. It's one of my favorite levels. After quite the exposition dump, you'll then head to Azerbaijan for a skiing level. As far as skiing levels go, I've played worse, but it can get frustrating quickly. One of my main issues with the game is the manual aiming system. The auto aim works well enough, but manually aiming can be a bit of a pain, particularly if you're in motion. You can control the speed at which you're skiing to an extent, but it's still easy to miss the oil drums you need to shoot to complete the level. It is relatively short though, so it's not too bad, I guess. Yet this has always been one of my least favorite levels of the game. Though next up is my actual least favorite level, Night Watch. I usually enjoy stealth levels, and I believe they're a natural fit for a Bond game. Yet this one drives me up the wall. Part of the problem is that the graphics, impressive as they are for the N64, hinder my visibility of distance, whereas the guards don't seem to have that same restriction, and seem to know that I'm coming long before I see them. I'm also not sure as to how close I can get to them before they see me, as that seems to be inconsistent. You also have certain restrictions that you must plan around, such as none of the guards can be killed and you are not given enough darts to take care of them all. And you cannot alert or harm Gabor, who can be fairly difficult to tell apart from the standard guards you're knocking out, and he turns out to be the biggest roadblock for me. So I end up replaying the level multiple times and it becomes a miserable experience. The following level, Midnight Departure, also encourages stealth, but at least it's not forced and you have the option of going loud. I love having this kind of variety in games, and it's one of the most technically impressive levels of the game. It's pretty massive, relatively speaking, and you have multiple routes you can take to progress. Plus, it's cool that if you're quick enough, you can kill Davidoff close to the start, or leave him be and come across him at the airfield. The improved draw distance is also much appreciated here, as when you approach the airfield, there are guards and towers that you can see from the distance and can take out with your sniper without them seeing you. It's great fun. Bond hops on the plane, and we proceed into Masquerade. This level features something I feel is missing from some of the Bond games: non-action gameplay. Bond stories will often have moments of downtime where Bond is doing plainclothes spy work or is just walking through a party, and these add to the fantasy of being 007. Like when Moore follows Lois Chiles in Moonraker, or when Brosnan goes to Carver's party in Tomorrow Never Dies, or when Craig goes to the Macau casino in Skyfall. In order to have the perfect Bond game which fully replicates the feel from the movies, you need these moments, and they can be fun to play through if you know how to do it. Nightfire's The Exchange mission has a bit where Bond just goes through Drake's party in a tux, and the GoldenEye remake has Bond scanning the faces in Zukovsky's nightclub. Masquerade from Twine has Bond showing travel documents to the Colonel and Christmas Jones and then walking through the bunker for a bit. This is a short section and may seem like such a minor thing to praise, but it brings a smile to my face when Bond games realize there's more to Bond than shooting. I also adore the shootout afterwards. The bunker sequence is an exciting, if cheesy, bit of action from the film, and I've always loved it, so playing through it and recreating iconic moments makes me happy. Speaking of which, I mentioned earlier how the game sometimes deviates from the film and sometimes adheres to it. There are singular moments in the levels that have you recreate a part of the film, such as here in Masquerade when you must jump up and grab a hold of this bar to escape the bomb explosion. This isn't something you'd normally do in other levels, so it can be confusing what exactly you must do if you've not seen the film. However, seeing the film doesn't necessarily give you a leg up, as I mentioned with the opening Bilbao level. Don't get me wrong, it's exciting when my knowledge of the film is rewarded, and most movie tie-in games might change some things around for the sake of gameplay, and that's fine. But here, it's just not consistent throughout. Also, Twine's story is one of the more complex of the series, and while I'm impressed with how much they can get across, there are bits where I think the game struggles in its goal to retell the story. For instance, M is suddenly in Azerbaijan at the end of Masquerade, listening to Elektra reveal herself as the mastermind, and we're not told until the briefing for the next mission why she's there. Bond also has his line about overlooking beluga caviar, despite the fact that Zukovsky has not appeared before now. The game's just not very smooth in how it connects the dots for the story. The next two levels are each half of a larger one, City of Walkways. The first is going from warehouse to warehouse, searching for Zukovsky's computer. The second is going from warehouse to warehouse, only this time you're encountering the helicopter buzzsaws. The second is more memorable to me, but it does feature one of my least favorite bits from the game, the helicopter boss fight. The thing that makes this part awful is that you're encouraged to take this thing down with the missiles from the back of Zukovsky's car, and the helicopter loves to move around. Using the guided aiming system after you shoot the rocket is one of the most aggravating things I've played in a while. For whatever reason, I missed the helicopter almost every time and the missile somehow ended up coming directly back at me. No joke, on my last playthrough, I replayed this entire level no less than 7 times because I kept dying from either my own missiles or because of the helicopter's fire. I found the best way to beat this was to stand almost under the copter and get straight shots with the alternate fire mode, which is still not the easiest thing in the world. But Lord, I don't think I've gotten this mad at a game since playing Cortex's Castle at the end of Crash 4. Bond then accompanies Zukovsky to Istanbul, where Bolian is revealed to be a traitor. The level turncoat is a chase through the streets and rooftops of Istanbul. I really like the concept, and overall I like this level. 2 minor gripes though. First, the jumping mechanic kept failing me and I died several times due to fall damage. Second, I discovered by accident that this level has an invisible timer or something, as because I was struggling to make a jump, I fell so far behind Bolian that I failed the mission. Would have been nice to know beforehand. The succeeding level, Fallen Angel, begins the climax of the game and has Bond being tortured in Maiden's Tower before Zukovsky comes in and frees him. Not much to say here. It features a nice boss fight without guns with Gabor, and a tense moment where you must escape a room before the gas kills you. It ends with a recreation of the cold kill of Elektra from the film. I must say, I half expected this game to turn this into a boss fight of some kind. This is another place where the game mirrors the film, and I think it's a mistake. It works in the film because of all the drama between Bond and Elektra that led up to that moment, and the act proved that Bond could be the master of his own emotions. Here, it just feels anticlimactic. The penultimate level begins with a stealth section, which I find easier to bypass than to play as the level intends. Instead of going through the guards, I like to zip up around the back of the submarine and then run up to the hatch. Once inside, it's more of a standard shoot 'em up. One of the objectives is to save the good Dr. Jones, and I love that she can show up in one of several locations, making you be more thorough in searching the sub and having to be careful about who you shoot since there are innocent naval guards being held at gunpoint. The final level, Meltdown, has a bit of a negative reputation, and it's easy to see why. The first half has you navigate an underwater maze, and it's really easy to get turned around. The second half doesn't even have you face Renard in a proper boss battle. You just press a button to impale him with a rod, and then use the grapple watch to ascend through the sub, shooting a few random guards in the process. It's a fairly underwhelming finale to the game's campaign. I don't hate this level, but it does feel like a bit of a downer compared to the build-up of the previous few levels. So that's the main campaign. Overall, a solid one amongst Bond video games with some nice variety. It does feel like it has its own identity apart from its N64 predecessor, opting for linear design while throwing in the odd, more open levels on occasion. I think it could have been improved if it didn't feel a bit restrained. At times, it seems to want to fly free on its own, using moments from the film as starting points and creating original scenarios for levels. At others, it feels obligated to stick close to the film, and it tries to find ways to naturally fit in moments, and that works half the time. I just wish the game would go one way or the other, rather than playing this balancing act. I also feel that even on agent difficulty, the game can be a bit tough at times. I'm inclined to be charitable about this, since I feel that some Bond games' easy settings are perhaps too easy. I do wish the secret agent difficulty would also come down a hair, though I feel the 00 agent difficulty is about right. Looking at the campaign as a whole, it's not as consistently fun as I'd like it to be. But that doesn't mean it isn't one of the better examples of first-person shooters on the N64, and it's unfairly forgotten in the shadow of its more acclaimed older brother. The multiplayer side of the game is really its own brand of special. Because of the inspired choice to include AI bots, it means there's no reason to skip the mode. A lot of Bond multiplayers either depend on additional physical players in order to be playable, or are entirely online, meaning you can't just play the mode whenever you feel like it. The addition of bots increases the longevity of the mode, and there are some solid maps here, including an early version of Nightfire's best multiplayer map, the Sky Rail. Plus, there's a fun complement of multiplayer characters, including ones from earlier films. However, one of the big problems I have with some of EA's Bond games in the multiplayer is the arbitrary character restrictions. Unless you're playing a team mode, you can't have more than one good character in a match, meaning the rest have to be from the selection of evil characters. This is entirely unnecessary and quite puzzling. I can sort of see how this might come about in the development, but I feel multiplayer modes have their own life apart from the world of the campaign or the overall series. It shouldn't matter if I want to have Bond and Sukovsky duke it out against Judi Dench's M, since the multiplayer isn't usually part of the story, nor does it play by the same rules. I mean, does it make sense that Alec Trevelyan and Max Zorin would be shooting at Sir Robert King, or that Mayday would go against Wei Lin? No. So why does it matter that Bond is shooting Christmas Jones in a multiplayer match? Because I played this on original hardware, that means I played this game in its full pixelated glory on a modern widescreen TV, and boy did it look bad, even with the expansion pack. I'm not going to criticize the graphics too harshly, as I'm experiencing them in a way that the developers never intended me to see them. But I kept thinking back to my experiences of other N64 titles on modern systems, and it only made me long for a modern port of this game even more. The controls work fine for the most part. I had to get used to holding the A or B buttons while pressing other buttons for certain actions, and the auto level threw me off at points. But other than my earlier complaints about the jumping mechanic and the manual aim, it was perfectly playable. The auto aim isn't as good as modern games, obviously, but it's surprisingly solid for the time period that this was made in, so I mostly relied on that. I also must give a shout out to the sounds of the game. This is some of the best sound design for the N64. The explosions are powerful, the voices sound great, even if the line readings can be awkward, and each gun has its own distinct sound. The music is disappointing, though. It would be unfair of me to expect the game to replicate the genius of Grant Kirkhope and Graham Norgate again, but the scores started to get repetitive over the course of the campaign. I also feel there are far less tracks than there should be, with certain levels just reusing earlier tracks. And while I'd love to give the game points for replicating the feel of David Arnold's film soundtrack, right down to the main theme's melody being incorporated, I'm gonna have to take back those points for not including the James Bond theme even once. Come on, EA, this isn't a Daniel Craig Bond game. You can use the Bond theme as liberally as you want. I want it done as frequently and as bombastically as the movie this was based on. All things considered, The World Is Not Enough is a solid James Bond game. It gives me a lot of what I want, but it's just a few steps short of greatness. It did prove that EA were perfectly capable of producing fantastic Bond games, and that there's more to do with the property than just replicate GoldenEye. Because of my experience with the game, I just don't have the nostalgia goggles with this that I do with a lot of the other games, so I haven't yet learned to come to terms with the game's faults like others have. That being said, this is definitely worth a few playthroughs, and if more classic Bond games were to be re-released on modern systems in the future, I hope this would be one of the candidates to kick that initiative off. I wouldn't exactly call The World Is Not Enough for the N64 underrated, as those who have played it seem fairly complimentary of it, but I would call it overlooked. Despite the relative success of the game, EA found themselves in a strange place with the series at the end of the year 2000. They were 4 games in, and everybody was still comparing them to GoldenEye despite their best efforts. But thankfully, EA kept trying to create the perfect 007 video game experience. The next major Bond video game after the year 2000 would be the first for the 6th generation of consoles, taking advantage of the more powerful hardware. And as far as this fan is concerned, Agent Under Fire marks the beginning of the golden age of Bond video games.